Hello, and welcome back to We're Not So Different, a podcast about how we've always been idiots. My name is Luke Waters, and I'm an amateur historian. And as always, I'm joined by Dr. Eleanor Yaniga, who is anything but. Today, we are talking about more days in the lives of people, of clergy this time. Before we get there, we got a couple of questions from patrons. The first one is from Professor Science. Wow, we have the Professor Science.
Professor
That
Science?
is incredible.
Good
Thank
Lord.
You.
Thank you for your work.
Yes,
I love
thank
germ
you.
theory.
Yeah, it's very nice. Yeah, I'm here on Tyneside, sitting outside a pub, drinking an ABK Hells from a brewery that is 716 years old. This isn't even an outlier. The Hohenstephan brewery is 1,000 years old. Is 1,000 years old in a bit. My question is this: how come German breweries have survived the riptides of history to still be making beer hundreds of years after their founding?
First out, shout out the Tyneside. Well done. Second of all, shout out beer. We love it. I am, of course, going to talk about Czech erasure here.
Okay.
Because, the Weinstephan brewery, respect. We love them. Great.
Tasty.
But, it's a great amount of disrespect to the Brzeznovsky Klasztorny Pivovar, okay? Because the Brzeznev, Brzevnov, sorry, just like, how do we say this again? Brzevnov. They were founded in the year of our Lord 993. And they'd been making beer. And you know how those fucking Germans get around being like, actually, I think you'll find that Weinstephan is the oldest. You know what they do? They go, continuously operating brewery. Because, the Hussites went in there to Brzevnov, and they were like, get fucking out.
Can't you guys be cool? Like, it really sucks. You find a group you like, they're pretty fun, and then they're like, oh, get out of the brewery. It's like, come on, guys, what were they doing? They weren't stopping. The brewery wasn't stopping you from getting bread and wine, together. Like,
it's like, yeah. See, the thing,
shameful.
I'm like, my thing about this is it's very sad because I understand why they want to like kick some monks' asses. Like that's very much like par for the course for some Hussites. But there's a brewery in there, you guys. You guys.
Come on.
There's a brewery in there. And I like, but I really like Brzevnov because it was founded by one of the Bohemian saints, Saint Adalbert. And he hoomst got by the Pomeranians, not the little dogs, but whatever. So, and they were just like brewing away, and then the Hussites kind of like almost take down the monastery, but then it gets rebuilt eventually, and then it picks back up again. So like we know that they're like absolutely like getting it hardcore. And we also know, like in terms of Czech brewing, we invented lager. I want to point that out.
Okay.
It's called Ležák. And also we know that, like, for example, you see much more secular brewing happening in a Czech context at first, because like from the 13th century onward, the royal towns were given a very specific right, which is called the mile right. And you could brew like within a mile of the town itself. And basically the crown would just kind of like cream off taxes from that instead of attempting to control it. And so like I think it's the Tepla brewery is one of the oldest of the burger breweries, so like connected to a town. And we know that they existed from about 1200. And then you've got Hodolin from 1228, and of course Olomouc from about 1250. And then in a response to this, the nobility are like, well, I'm going to found my own breweries because like it seems like the crown is making a whole lot off of it. So the Rosenbergs, they opened the Bohemia Regnant brewery in 1379. And the Bohemian Regnant has never stopped brewing. Because, obviously, like, the Hussites don't care about those breweries, right? They're not going to, like, stop that at all. But so this is all tangent. But you are incredibly right about how the Weinstephan, they are old. And so they've got like an interesting one because they're like, well, we think there was an abbey from about 768 and we think they were tithing hops, so maybe they were brewing. And I'm like, baby, this is specious. All right. But we definitely know that they had been brewing since about 1050. But because they're in Bavaria, right, this is, so just getting back to the key to this question, which is a good one. One of the reasons you see a lot of it, specifically coming out of Germany, is because Bavaria remains Catholic.
Yes.
Right? So during the Wars of Religion, you don't have the argy-bargy that you see, for example, in like Hussite towns and stuff where stuff can get interrupted. Like the monks aren't going to get kicked out, so they can keep going. And then what happens is that you then get a process of secularization, especially in the late 19th and early 20th century, and then they just get owned by the state. So what happens very specifically at Weinstephan is that the Bavarian state steps in, and they're like, guess what?
Yeah.
So, like, we own you now. So there's just kind of like a conglomeration of that into a state-owned brewery. And now you get a lot of this as well, obviously, in the Czech Republic. So, like, very famously, Budweiser, or, well, we have to call it Budvar now because Americans are pieces of shit. Like, it's owned by the state.
I did nothing. I didn't make you call it that.
I know, right? It's like, it's such a ridiculous thing. It's like, I go on and on about copyright happening in this way. Like, it's so frustrating that brands can just swoop in and go, no, man. I was like, bro, you are not in Český Budějovice right now. So, but so like Budvar, very famously, we're starting to get more Budvar here in London, which I'm really excited about because since Budvar is owned and operated by the state, they have like rules about it. Like, you're never going to get a bad Budvar because it's come from České Budějovice, and the state is like, you have to have the right fucking glass. You have to like maintain, or we're not going to let you buy this. Like, do not bring shame upon, our great legacy. Whereas, like, I'll tell my famous Staropramen story. So, like, when I first moved to London, I go to the pub and I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, they've got Staropramen on, which is like a fine Czech beer. Like, it's not my favorite, but like, I like, shout out Gambrinus. Shout out. I really like Gambrinus, and I really like Krušovice in particular. But I was like, oh great, Staropramen, this is gonna be excellent, or whatever. And I'm like, fuck, that's shit. Like, these guys have terrible lines. Oh well, okay, I'll stop drinking that. Go to another pub another time. Ooh, Staropramen, I'll get that. Wow, these guys are not cleaning their lines. What the fuck? This tastes so terrible. I do this like 5 or 6 times before I find out that Staropramen had licensed out the name. And the Staropramen was being brewed up north here in England, and that's why it sucks shit. And it hurt me very deeply in my heart, and I was like, wow, this is very disrespectful to my culture. But anyway, this has been beer ranting. Great question. Thank you so much, Professor Science. Sorry I went on several tangents about mine own bullshit. And I really hope that beer was great because it sounds good. And now I'm going to go get a pint after this because I'm inspired.
Nice.
I'm inspired, yeah.
Yeah, I think Stefan is in the part of Bavaria was spared from a lot of the worst aspects of the 30 Years' War. Not all of it, of course, just part of it. And I think Stefan was in that area, which is, one of the reasons why it's still around. And I mean, of course, there are even older companies than that. The oldest continuously operating independent company is a hotel in Japan called Nishiyama Onsen Kyunkan, and the oldest company that still exists is a construction company from Japan called Kongo Gumi, but they were bought out by a parent company in 2006 after 1,428 years of existence. So yeah, sometimes just the tide. Sometimes you get lucky. The tides of history kind of pass you by. Not totally, but they don't. You can keep operating, and then But yeah, most of the oldest businesses in the world are either in Japan, the central European Germanic areas or the UK. Yeah. Professor Science, thank you very much for that question. Next, we have one from Quixotic. Says, nowadays, the Catholic Church investigates miracles, usually through the solicitation of subject matter experts, typically in the form of a miraculous healing, where the doctor says, yeah, I don't know, patient just got better when they shouldn't have, human body is weird and we don't understand it, and someone from the Vatican checking it off as unexplainable by means other than faith. Back in the Middle Ages, when miracles were taken a lot more seriously societally and experimental science and empirics weren't the same as they are today, how did the Church go about investigating miracles? Was there a racket for hoaxing miracles / bribing clerics to get something declared a miracle to attract more pilgrims?
So basically, this is a great question, by the way. This is a really interesting one because miracles absolutely do get investigated. But ordinarily, because you are going to be having them kind of investigated at a church level, there is a willingness to accept that these things have happened. So because what is sort of happening kind of falls under the auspices of the way that we think about saints more generally. And, when we talk about how a lot of saints are essentially like grandfather did, because they'll just go, oh, well, everyone's already worshiping that guy as a saint. So yeah, yep, he's a saint now. Kind of similarly goes for miracles. Right? Because the miracle stories most of the time begin to spread and coalesce almost immediately around it. So, for example, we can say St. Adalbert, right? Who I was just talking about in terms of his connection to the Brezna monastery, right? So after he gets killed by the Pomeranians, the Poles have him, have his body, and they almost immediately begin recording miracles, especially healing miracles. About him. And then the Czechs are like, shit, fuck, we got to go get our guy. Right? And then they record a miracle where they go to try to move the body and are paralyzed and unable to do it until they pray to him. And then it's like, okay. And then the body's really light. It's easy to transport to Prague, blah, 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 blah. No one looks into this shit. Yo, they're in the 10th century. They're just like, yeah, okay, fine. The Czechs want to have another saint. It's been a while. They've only got Ludmilla and Venceslas. Sure, yeah, they want Adalbert. Great, go for it. And it kind of benefits the church more generally because Adalbert is from the rival, very important family to the Przemyslids. And so the idea here is that it's going to bring some kind of reciprocity to what had been kind of a lot of bloody feuding back and forth between the families. So it's if they get a saint as well, then maybe everyone will calm their shit. So it's in the church's best interest to just take that on board and say, yeah, that 100% happened. What they're going to do, though, is they are going to go in and make sure that they consider the person who is doing the miracle to be above board. Because, you don't want to get, anyone who's a heretic being connected with miracles. Right. So, you can't have, so for example, women will probably be investigated more than men are. Especially if they're coming from common backgrounds, right? So what begins to happen when they investigate things more thoroughly is that in order to be considered a saint in the first place, you have to have someone who is going around being your hype man for ages, and someone who's already writing your biography, your confessor. A lot of the time. And they're essentially then laying the groundwork for you to be considered a saint. And so then after you die, when the miracles start showing up, then those are kind of taken as a part of the attestations in what the confessors were already writing up. And then everyone will go, okay, right? So there isn't a whole lot to be lost from the way the church sees things, because, the more saints there are, the more saints there are, provided that they're already happy with the saint.
Yeah.
The worry is more is the person saint material, or what the fuck is going on here? So they will check things out though. You can't be yo, I couldn't walk and then I could, and then find yourself paralyzed again. Right? That's not going to work. But also what qualifies as a miracle could be, it'll be older medieval saints miracles are really wild, a Saint Foy, really famously, so she's over in the French lands. Like, some of her miracles are like, oh, a guy came to her shrine and didn't leave enough money, so she ripped his eyeball out.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, you know, like that's a
That's okay. Yeah.
right, you know, like, and so those are pretty like
Huh.
rugged. Like, some miracles can be rugged, but by the time you're hitting like the 14th century and stuff, they're doing stuff like cutting open St. Clair's heart and finding bones shaped like a crucifix inside it, right? And as it becomes harder and harder to become a saint, like, you're usually coming from the highest echelons anyway. You're already really, really high up in the church, or you're really, really high up, like, in terms of being a royal, so they just don't give a fuck. Like, that's how it'll be. And now you could go ahead and be Marjorie Kemp all you fucking want, and like be annoying and cry and then like self-publicize, but like, they're not going to take you on as a saint, so nobody cares. And I wouldn't put it past Marjorie Kemp to like try to buy some miracles after her death, but no one was having it because she was too annoying. So there you go, right? This bitch, I swear to God. Ugh. Anyway.
Yeah. I'm sorry, that was just really funny. Yeah.
I'll go to the mat on that one. I just I just don't like her.
That's fine. You know, I don't know jack shit about her anyway. Quixotic, thank you very much for the question. If you want to ask us questions like those, then please do subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/WNSDpod. You get a bunch of bonus episodes. There's over 70 now. You get all the regular episodes ad-free, and you get to ask us questions like that. Also, you get access to the Discord, and it's fun. $5 a month, patreon.com/WNSDpod. But also wanted to let you know, if you are on Instagram, then you can follow the show there. It's the same thing as on Twitter, at WNSDpod. You can check us out there. And if you have moved off of the other socials but still are on Instagram to see your relatives' kids or whatever, then
we're gonna be there.
You know, we're there. Check it out. Yeah, we're over there too now. Anyway, on to the main show. So today, in our Day in the Life series, we turn to the clergy. After covering peasant farmers, knights, city-going merchants, and royals, the men and women of the Catholic Church are the largest untouched group left in medieval Europe. It's also one of the largest disparities to be had, as these orders encompass everything from the lowliest dirt poor parish priest all the way up to the big dog in the mitre, the vicar of Christ himself, the Pope, and from the most humble nun to abbots akin to high lords with their own fiefdoms. The quintessential idea of the medieval clergy is that of the wealthy, learned, perpetually scowling archbishop who lords over his flock of mud-smeared, illiterate peasants, ignores their spiritual needs, and robs them to line his own pockets. And to be sure, there were quite a few of those guys, and we'll definitely talk about them today. But there's another side here. Yes, the Catholic Church became hegemonic in Europe in the Middle Ages and formed the social, cultural, and spiritual backbone on which the superstructure of the manorial system depended. But that whole thing doesn't work without the tiny cogs to make it function. That's where the local parish priest, or in some cases itinerant preacher, comes in. A man who will tend to the needs of the people, give them spiritual and material comfort, and lead them through dark times. Outside of the sympathetic noble, these priests acted as one of the few parts of the system that directly interacted with and served the people in any meaningful way. Government bureaucracies responsible to the people were still a ways off in Europe, and the councils of high lords and royals were removed by several dozen layers from anything approaching popular consent. So it was left to the humble priest to pick up a lot of the slack. Then there's the monastic orders, which follow much the same system, wherein some abbots live in the lap of luxury, acting as haughty nobles, much like Abbo, the abbot in The Name of the Rose, which you can hear more about on Patreon. But there are also monks and nuns who perform menial labor or provided for the locals as best they could. Today we're going to talk about them and, both the good and the bad, and find out what their days were like. We'll have to jump around a bit, but that's okay. It'll be fine. We're going to start with the parish priest, then move on to the archbishop, and finally check in on monks and nuns of the various holy orders. Oh, and we said this would be the last of our Day in the Life episodes, but we got a few more requests from patrons, so we'll do at least one more after this, jumping around again. But yeah, for basically the entirety of the Middle Ages, most Europeans would only have contact with one member of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, and that was their local parish priest. They might see the retinue of a powerful member of the church move past on occasion, and there were certainly some who worked with everyone from the archbishop on down, but for the most part, the people knew their local priests. Some local priests could amass wealth, but a lot of them were just, regular shepherds who administered the local church, and in the process became providers of all sorts of religious, cultural, and social services, taking on an outsized role that we see from preachers today. Eleanor, before we get going to anything else, what religious functions were expected of the local priest throughout the day? Is he doing everything from like sweeping out the church to lighting the candles, or did they maybe have some help with that? Like, what is, what's going on with that on a regular basis?
See, this is a really interesting question because it varies depending on like how much money you got, right? And it also varies like depending on whether or not you fucking suck. Right? Like there's like, especially by the later Middle Ages, there's a real problem with people getting a benefice. So like basically there it's like, oh yeah, here you go, you're the priest of this church, and then like never showing up. Mm-hmm. And just like taking the income that's supposed to sustain them throughout this. But, a priest in a city is probably going to have like more money coming in because they are going to have more households. And this is going to be different to like a priest in a big village or town. And then like a smaller village. Like if you're administering like a really small hamlet, you're going to maybe have more work, or you might get help in the church just by like from the people of the village. So you might be sweeping, brah. Like if you're in one of these tiny things, it's like, yeah, okay, like you're going to be sweeping that thing out. But the correlation to this is that if you are serving a really tiny community, you're going to have fewer things to do throughout the day anyway, because you've got fewer people to administer to. So you can just worry about like sweeping and candles, and oh my God, like there's so much candles.
That's what I keep thinking. Like every time I see like something that is like a medieval or early modern like Catholic imagery or homage, and I see all the candles, the first thing I think is, my God, lighting all of those without a fucking lighter. Get the hell out of, like, oh God, it's what like, a pain in the ass.
At like a fully medieval budgets for churches and monasteries and stuff, it's like the drill tweet. It's
help,
like
help,
spend less
my
on
parish
candles.
Is dying.
Like, no, right? And like one of the things that gets most commonly donated is wax for candles. Like that's a really big thing.
I'm not like, that makes perfect sense. I'm not like, holy shit though. Like you would think the priest is like worried about like, oh man, we gotta, gotta administer to the flock, and he's really like, when's that fucking wax shipment arrive? Those bees better come through. Goddamn.
Like, okay, so fully, I was just like, oh, Saint-Foy ripped that guy's eyeball out.
Yeah,
it was over candles.
Yeah,
it's like
they were like, not enough.
You didn't donate like a big enough candle.
Enough. I will. It is well known that I will occasionally defend Protestantism from certain slanders about it, mostly just to say that the Catholic Church was fucked either way, regardless of how the Reformation shook out. But they really shouldn't have gotten rid of the candles. The candles are fucking like amazing. That is just
candles
just A plus mood, A+ lighting. But unless they choose like a really weird scent that day, you go in and it's like a fucking Yankee candle in there. You're like, my eyes.
I gotta tell you what, like the biggest things that Protestants fucked up, in my opinion, is getting rid of the candles and stuff, and getting rid of like the decorations.
Oh yeah,
because like when you see like the cool religious paintings and stuff that churches used to have, or you see the cool ass statues and stuff, you're like, you guys fucked up.
You guys did fuck up.
Yeah,
like don't get me wrong. Like I get a lot of why you did it, because they were, oppressing you, and you just wanted to practice your religion or get a break on taxes or whatever.
I
But
feel
yeah, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done that. Yeah, it's yeah, so like they're sweeping, they're
lighting candles,
they fucking. I got to be up at 4 a.m. dog. I got to get all these candles lit by 9:30. Like,
for sure. And it's like, okay, so like they are also like, one of the things that's going to happen most mornings is they will have like an office of some kind, usually first thing. So you'll get up and you'll do kind of like little mass, like just like a little mass, to kind of like kick the day off.
And would that have like just a few people, or would that be like a lot of people would you would normally see there?
I think that's really going to vary. It'll probably mostly be just a few people, because most people are going to be out in the fields.
Yeah, they're like listen, Reverend, or listen, Father, I love you, but this weed ain't gonna shuck itself.
Exactly,
corn,
right?
Never mind, sorry.
So like you might have older members of the community who aren't working anymore are going to be showing up, or anyone who's ill, they might go in because that'll make them feel better. But irregardless, if there's nobody there, you still do it anyway.
Right.
And then, like, depending on the size of your church, there is also something that might be happening, especially towards like the high and late medieval period, is you might have donations for side altars in churches. So do you know what I mean? If you've ever gone into a Catholic church, you've got the main altar up the top.
Yeah.
But when you've got really big ones, sometimes there's like little altars off to the side.
Right.
And what happens with those a lot of the times is they will be bequeathed to a church, specifically by a family or something like that, with a bunch of money as well. And the money is supposed to be spent to get the priests to say masses continually for the souls of people in their family who have died.
Right.
So you'll do kind of like your major mass, and then you'll move on to like doing masses whenever. Like, I mean, however you can kind of like slot them in throughout the day on any side altars that you might have as well. Again, this is going to really vary from church to church. It's totally different to be doing this at a church in London, where you're going to have a lot of rich people who are doing that, and like one like out in the countryside, like in the fens, right? They're probably not going to have that. And then specifically another thing that they're going to be doing is school.
Yeah.
Because the priests are going to be teaching the kiddies how to read and write Latin. So if there's any kiddies in town who are going to be learning to read and write, usually the priest is in charge of that. Again, so this is really like, if you're in London, you're going to have a lot more kids who you have to instruct every day in like Latin, because you're going to have a lot more rich people who can spare their kids. If you're out in the countryside with a bunch of peasants' kids, probably not so much. But I don't know, the blacksmith's kid, maybe, right? Like if you got a bunch of money, sure. The kids of richer farmers, like richer peasants who have a lot of land, you might be teaching their kids. And that's super, super common, right? So you're going to be doing like some light tutelage, very specifically around reading and writing in Latin. And of course, there's a religious bent to that as well, because you do it all like reading the Bible. And then that is fine. But then you're also going to be doing like various sacraments. So anybody who needs to be baptized, you'll just like get them in as and when. Because like if there's any new babies, you want them baptized ASAP, right? So you go around and you do that. Is there something like a funeral going on? You will have that. Is there someone in your parish who is sick? So you go out if somebody is especially incredibly sick, and you might give them extreme unction, where you first you confess them. And then you put oil on them, and like then you usually also do Eucharist for them, like one last time. In an ideal world, that's how everybody dies, is like having confessed their sins and like getting the Eucharist and everything like that, because then you're pretty much good to go, right? So you will be doing a lot of visiting sick people and doing that as well. Stuff like weddings. Because like weddings are a big deal, but they're not like the big deals that they are now.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, but you might do it on a Wednesday, or something like that, because it's just like, whatever, like, who cares? It's not like you haven't been planning it all year and blah, blah, blah. If you are a peasant, right? It's just like, Molly's knocked up, better get this show on the road, right? So there are all of these various things. And these are considered sort of like the bread and butter of parish life and what priests are for. So when we see complaints about the church, one of the big things that we see complaints about is people not doing this, or indeed charging for these things. So that's like a big complaint. Like my boy Milic, he claims that like priests in Prague are like demanding money to bury people. Right. And like say masses for the dead, which maybe they are. I don't know. Yeah. Right. But it's like these kind of things are just like the ticking over. This is what needs to happen every day. And this is what parish priests do, is just the sacraments and a regular mass. That's what's up.
Yep. Yep. So like outside of the religious functions, what other charitable and social services were priests expected to perform in the community?
Yeah, if you're a good guy, you also help out in the community. Yeah. And a lot of priests are. Like, to be very fair, it's, I'm unfair. Yeah. I focus on the naughty ones because I like that shit. Because I like to talk shit. Yeah. Like, that's fun for me. But there's a lot of really nice priests, to be fair. Yeah. And so you might be doing any number of things. So again, like not just administering to the sick if they're dying, but like bringing them food. Like, I mean, sometimes what you will do is because, you're bringing in tithes, and obviously some of that goes to like keep you housed, keep the church itself like in good nick, and some goes to Rome. But you would also maybe be like, oh, well, these guys are really hurting. So like bringing them food, giving them money, looking at those things. In really severe circumstances or really busy circumstances like harvest,
right?
You might help out in the fields. Or you might go down to the fields to go do be like, oh, hey, anyone want a quick sermon or some shit like while you're having your lunch? Yeah. And they'll be like, sermons, yes.
They're like, fuck yeah, he's going to talk about Jesus again. I love this so much.
Shit. Oh my God, I love Jesus. Like, like.
Fuck, hell yeah, it's 2 Timothy today. I love it so much.
Like, fully.
Whatever works, man. I get whatever gets you through the day, I guess.
Exactly. And so you do that. And another thing that you kind of do is you act almost as like a dignitary for the town. So like if people are kind of like rolling through, if you've got travelers who have questions or like don't know what's going on, they might just like stop by the church and be like, yo.
Question. Sorry, when you say travelers, you mean people traveling, not
the traveler community.
Yes, that is correct. I'm just making sure for my own edification. Not
shout out to the traveling community.
Yeah. I was just making sure that I was on the same page. I was like, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, shout out to the traveling community. You guys are killing it. So like if you're just kind of like rolling through town, this is sort of like a port of call. You might also, as a result of your function as priest, have to put travelers up for the night.
Yep.
It's more common in like monasteries, for example. But if there isn't one nearby and someone's rolling through town, you might be like, oh yeah, you can like sleep in the church. Or like, or indeed in the rectory. So it's like, it's almost a position as a dignitary as well. So you're supposed to kind of be the idealized Christian who's like doing all of, the acts of mercy, visiting the imprisoned, helping the sick, putting people up. So you're supposed to kind of almost be doing those things for the community because other people need to be working. So you're the person who can do all of the idealized things that a Christian community would want.
Yeah, it seems like they serve as something of like a primitive politician, like low level, like alderman type person, like somebody who is in some way looking out for the community in a time before you had political systems that had the politicians as we understand them today, or you had the bureaucracies to allow for like having like somebody's looking over this ward or this parish, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, and like oftentimes too, if something's really going wrong in your town, you might also kind of like go off to go like raise the alarm, like, or like talk to the bishop about something.
Right.
You know, like you might
Yeah.
represent the community as well.
Right, yeah. Yeah, well, these parish priests, they seem great and all. They just they just seem like really cool people. But enough about them. Let's talk about some assholes.
Yeah, you know.
We get the ultra powerful members of the clergy, the archbishops. They're about as high up as you can go before you're talking about life in the Vatican or Avignon or I guess Pisa too for like 10 years or what. I don't know. Everybody loves the Pisa, the
I
Pisa
do.
papacy.
I
Everybody
love
loves
it.
it. Lasted for like 6 or 10 years, and then everyone was like, yeah, we're not worried about it, you guys do what you want, thanks, bye. Yeah, so the archbishop's going to be the big cheese in the region, overseeing an entire archdiocese and the spiritual functions within, or so they say. As you might have guessed, positions this high up in the hierarchy tend to be political patronage appointments or nepotism placements that go to venal corrupt jerks, though that's not to say they were all like that. I'm sure there's been at least one good archbishop. Probably. Maybe. Anyway, archbishops are essentially the high nobility of the church hierarchy here. So let's see what they, or their servants, more likely, were doing. So, like, we're talking about, I don't know, like the Archbishop of like Canterbury or Westminster, or, pick your poison. What religious services are they themselves doing on a regular basis?
Yeah, no. So you know what the archbishop is going to do? Like he's showing up for the big ones.
Right.
So he's doing Easter. He's doing Christmas. He's doing
when they need to call in the big dog. They're like, all right,
yeah,
Christmas, Easter,
Michaelmas.
Whatever their equivalent to Mother's Day was. Get him in there. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, Feast of the Immaculate Conception. You're going to see
There we
the
go. There we
archbishop.
go.
Michaelmas. You're going to see the archbishop, and probably also Saints' Days. More particularly, especially if you're the Archbishop of Canterbury, like you better believe that you're doing like Thomas Becket's feast day,
Right.
like Hundo P. You're doing that.
They're dragging you out there when you got like the Black Plague, and you're like, I got to do this shit anyway. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So you're just doing like big dog shit.
Yeah.
Right. So you are going to be doing whatever is most important. And there's going to be so many other people who can say like the daily mass and stuff like that.
Right.
And you might do mass on Sundays. If you're around, more particularly, you might be doing the Sunday mass, which is usually like more elaborate than like the quicker masses that get said throughout the week. Right. So you very well might do that. But like, especially at large cathedrals like a Canterbury also has like monks. Right. So you've just got like a bunch of monks who are doing the offices throughout the day. And you might just like drop into those. Like you probably go to those masses, but you're probably not always doing them yourself. You're only doing like the most important ones.
Right.
So yeah, probably Sundays, probably feast days. Less likely that you were doing like fucking matins on a Monday morning, right? Like you were not like that's not what's up, right? Other people will do that for you.
So like from the Pope's perspective, let's say like you have installed Archbishop so and so at Canterbury. Like what is the Pope expecting them to do on like a daily basis? Like, are they really even expected to do anything other than like, like political functions, or is it something where, they have to adhere to something, some standard?
Yeah, what they're usually kind of doing all day is kind of like really boring ass.
Yeah, it sounds pretty boring.
Like it's like being a manager.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so you will be doing rather a lot of making sure that everyone's doing their jobs, like around the shop. You might be like looking over the accounts, like, having a meeting with your accounts guy and be like, how much wax are we bringing in? Or whatever. Like
you have like binders, and like one of them's thin. It's like indulgences, and then there's like the 6-inch quadruple ring binder that's like wax. Deliveries, wax ingoing, wax outgoing.
Completely. And like, overseeing tithes. So like making sure that everyone is kind of like paying in the right places, overseeing placements of parish priests. So, if like someone over in like Dunny on the Wold kicks it, you're going to then like go ahead and like replace them. It'll be your call. You'll say, okay, we're sending this guy out there. And cathedrals are massively important places where like a business is being held, stuff is being done. So there is a lot of kind of like back and forth just at the cathedral to oversee. So it is like being, a CEO or something of a corporation. So it's like, I mean, it's a job.
Yeah.
But you're doing kind of like really boring. You're going to meetings.
Yeah.
That's the thing that you're doing. Right.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, these people were obviously quite powerful locally, and even sometimes in region-wide scales and stuff like that. So, like, what were the social what social expectations does this person feel? Because I imagine they're gonna they have to go to dinner with the king. They have to talk to this bishop about some issue over what are they expected to do in that way?
Yeah, and there's a lot of this. There's a lot of going to dinner with the king.
Yeah.
Like,
I have to go eat pheasant again.
And it's like or the king coming to dinner, especially if you are at one of the cathedrals in the city. Like a lot of the time kings and archbishops are kind of like hand in glove. Right. Which is why the church gets so mad and why you have the investiture controversy and blah, 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 blah. It's like, because it's like you're getting your homies in there because, you were quite right in saying that bishops and archbishops are like the high nobility of the church, and they are also drawn from the high nobility. Yeah. Right. So these, like, this is your cousin anyway, so like you're going to be hanging out with them. Doing various things. So one of the major things that you're going to be doing is talking all the time with kings. And like, again, so it can really depend on like what your king's like and what they're doing. But they will do projects together. Like they will like cook up schemes, maybe be like, oh, let's have a fair. Yeah. Right. And then like in order to like bring in traders or something like that, that's something that people might do together. So obviously my boy Charles IV, he works really closely with Jan Oczko of Vlazim, who's the Archbishop of Prague at the time. And they're constantly at it. Like they're like, we're coming up with our own feast day. What do you think? Like, let's do a feast day, kind of thing. And
you look at the Archbishop's calendar, and there's like a block of time from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. that's just labeled like writing angry missives to people. Yeah. It's just
there's a lot of that. You do write a lot of.
I'm so fucking mad.
There's a lot of that. There's a lot of writing angry missives. There is a lot of also doing things like, so for example, having synods. So like a couple times a year, you'll get all of the clergy that are under you together, and you'll be like, I got some real problems with you people. Right. And like usually you like do some corrective sermons, and they're like, please don't be corrupt. I see you're being corrupt, knock that off. So they will be doing that. And if there are complaints about any members of your clergy, you might also be kind of like meeting with them and being like, fucking knock it off. Right. But again, it kind of depends on how big your archbishopric is. Like, if you are doing Prague, really hard for you to do that one-on-one. So you usually have like an archdeacon or something do that stuff for you. And then they'll kick up to you when things are seriously problematic. Yeah. Like if it's someone who's got like a higher profile and there are issues, whereas if you are bishop in like a smaller city, you might be doing it yourself, right? Yeah. So it really all depends. You also need to be seen to be doing kind of like the same charitable things. Like, you will, maybe you found a Lazar house for, people who have leprosy. Maybe you have like regular events where like you're doing very specific charity work. There are expectations about things like that. But also because of how important archbishops are, a lot of the times they're like running around. Like, you might get sent to Rome or Avignon or Pisa, on behalf of the king, or if you if you're like really quite important and there's some kind of theological matter to debate, the Pope will call you in to chat about things. So there is a lot of work being done in that way as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, again, that stuff's all well and good, but, we're here for the juicy, for the hot goss, and that is the political dynamics of dealing with the church and the local ruler, who may or may not have control over your appointment, depending on where we are temporally and physically in the Caesaro-papism slap fight. So, how are they, I mean, obviously, in some cases, they're going to be more favorable to one side or the other. Maybe they'll take the church. Maybe they like the king more for whatever reason. How are you dealing with those dynamics? Because, on a very real level, one of those people can have you killed. I mean, actually, both sides can technically, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a shout out Thomas Becket. He gets his ass got.
I mean, yeah, and the Pope removed archbishops. He didn't. I don't know that the popes did a lot of specific killing or assassinations of archbishops, but they certainly removed some of them. So
they will bust your ass back down. I'll bust your ass back down to private. I'll bust your ass back down so quick you'll be out in the fields.
You're gonna be given fucking nuns in Siberia. It's that's Orthodox. Fucking fine. Find me the coldest place in Europe that's not Orthodox. It's where you're going.
Exactly, right? There's a lot of that thrown around. But, so Thomas Becket is an outlier, but it's also a good person to talk about for this, because it kind of shows you what the limitations are. Because, initially, Henry fights really hard for Thomas to be the archbishop, because those two were homies. Right?
Yeah.
They were going around getting drunk and going hawking.
Yeah.
He was a fancy lad from the city. And, and Henry was like, I want this fucking guy because, I know he's a good time guy. He's from London. So, there's this kind of, idea here that because since he's from kind of, the London guild system, he's not going to be so unruly as a really high up noble might be, because he was born over near Gutter Lane. It's like a 10-minute walk from where I am right now. So there is kind of a lot of ribbing him about that, about how he was born common. And it's but fucking rich. So let's calm down, right?
Yeah.
So Henry's okay, this guy is going to be tractable and he is going to do what I want. And Henry is a guy who's got a really extensive empire. I buy the Angevin Empire thing, so that's fine.
Yeah.
And he's got a lot of irons in the fire, let's just say. So the last thing that he wants is an archbishop who's going to go out of his control. But then, Thomas immediately has a heel turn for whatever fucking reason when he's made archbishop, and immediately gets out of control, is going down to Rome, chatting shit and basically running around France. Just hiding in various other cathedrals that are not his own in France until he gets murdered, right? And obviously he's a massive outlier, but it is instructive of what the possibilities kind of are. Both for being a pet archbishop, which is what he was intended to be. So someone who intercedes on Henry's behalf with the church, hopefully kind of keeps more money around in England instead of passing it back to Rome, maybe bigs up Canterbury a little bit more as, a pilgrimage destination, which lol, he definitely helped with that. Am I right? And kind of does things on a more local level, right? That this is kind of the intention, as opposed to being someone who's really locked in with the papacy and kind of back and forth to Rome and, I don't know, maybe arguing with the Pope instead.
Yeah, that, Caesaro-papism is way too big of a topic to broach right here.
I know, right?
I mean, if you're listening and maybe you're newer to the show, hey, welcome. Thank you so much. We've talked about Caesaro-papism at length during the Heresies and Reformation series, the Historical Materialism series, the stuff on the HRE and the 30 Years War. Like, there's a lot of stuff. If it's about the Catholic Church or the HRE, we almost certainly talked about Caesaropapism.
Yep.
Yeah, and, you know,
a little bit in Constantinople as well,
yeah,
I think.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's just, just a bit different over there. But, you know, that's the archbishops. We've already talked about how royalty and nobility are a little bit, so you guys know, but we did want to give you, you know, like a flair for it because there's obviously a wide range here. But we're going to sandwich it between the actual cool people in all of this, which were first the parish priest and now just the regular members of the various religious orders. Again, we've done a couple of episodes on the religious orders and what they did, so you can go back and check that out. We're going to skip the abbots, you know, since we talked about the archbishop, and we want to focus on the men and women who did the grunt work. And this is where we actually get to talk about specifically women, too, who did some of this. Yay, woo! Woo! Unironic woo this time. Obviously, we've spoken at great length about the various Catholic holy orders of the Middle Ages. You know, as I said, we did 2 episodes on them in 2023, but we haven't talked about what their daily lives were like that much. And as much as we do love The Name of the Rose and Umberto Eco's faithful portrayal of medieval Europe, check out the Patreon. That's not really what life was like for a monk because there just weren't so many dang killings or debates about whether Christ laughed. Actually, I'll be honest, I don't know. There may have been more debates about Jesus laughing, but definitely not as many murders. Unless there's just like a huge cover-up of the murder rate in medieval Europe, which, you know what, if we uncovered that, I would think that was pretty funny. Yeah, so let's close it out. Let's talk about some monks and some nuns. Obviously, you know, the big thing with them is the hours. So, you know, Eleanor, real quick, what are the hours? What do they mean? And what are they doing?
Yeah,
okay. What are they attending at this time? Yeah.
So it's fun. I simply love to talk about canonical hours, which are like a kind of also slightly different to the holy offices. But so basically, it's
I do not understand the difference.
My love. So basically, I barely do. So there's 7 canonical hours.
Yeah.
Okay. There is matins, which is usually like midnight. Okay, then I've already fucked up, right? Because there's also like 2 subsets. So you have like you have the more important ones. You got 3 important ones, and then like 4 minor ones.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the major and minor hours. So matins is like midnight, right? And then you have louds, which is usually like right after midnight. Like they just usually go matins louds.
Yeah.
Matins louds. And then vespers, which is said in the evening, and those are like the really important longer ones. But then you also have terce, sext, non, and compline. Okay, so those are the little ones. Now, like, let me explain when they happen. So, like, as I say, you're gonna have matins and louds at midnight. So that's when your day starts. So you get your ass out of bed at midnight. Okay. And then that's going to go on for about an hour because you'll go matins and then louds. And then you're going to go back to bed at 1. Cool. Then you're going to get back up a little bit before 6. And then you're going to go for church service at prime.
Yeah.
And prime is going to be shorter, usually about half hour or so. So just like, this is a quick one, like, yeah. Like you're having the big one at midnight, and then you have a short one at 6 a.m. Then you go have a light breakfast. Okay.
Yep.
After breakfast, you will go back to the chapter house, where usually you'll have a mass. Maybe you'll do confession if you feel like, I don't know, if you've killed someone and you need to.
If you've killed several members of your abbey, several other monks at your abbey, and need to get it off your chest.
Yeah, like if you have blackmailed one of your fellow monks into blowing you, then you might need to confess, right?
Yep.
So
not that we have any problem with that, but the church did. So,
yeah, that's all. And then this is what you're going to start doing now is whatever your job is.
Right.
Right. So if you work in the library, off you go. If you work in the scriptorium, you're going to go right, right, right. If you are like the herbalist, off you go, right? Like you're going to go do your little things. You might like just be doing a little bit more light prayer. If you're one of the older brothers and you're disabled in some way, you might just do that. Or like just do some reading, right? At 9, you've got terce. And you're going to have like another mass. so this is high mass. But again, it's like pretty quick. This is about like half an hour or so. And then you go back to work. So like just like a quick break at 9 for a light mass and then back to work. Then at noon, you've got sext. So again, one more time, a church service. And then you're going to have lunch after that. And lunch is like the big meal for the day. After lunch, you might go back to sleep. You know, we see this actually, like that's one good thing that we see in The Name of the Rose a lot, where they're like, yeah, well, I'm going to go catch a nap. Because, you know, you're waking up at weird hours of the night and things like that. So sometimes you just go back to sleep. Otherwise, you might do something like a kind of light around in this, like maybe you're going to do some reading. You know, if you might do one of the jobs. Like, who knows? Then you've got nons around 3. Again, this is like this is one of the minor ones, so that's about half an hour, and then you go back to work. So you definitely are going to kind of like do work after nons. So between lunch and nons, maybe you're just catching a nap. Maybe you're hanging out doing something light, but you definitely go back to work after that. And then you have vespers. And vespers is, again, one of the big ones. So vespers is usually around 6 or kind of like sunset, depending on what's going on for you. So this is going to last about an hour or so. And then you're going to like go do private stuff. Like, you might pray on your own. You might go read or whatever. Because around now, you know, you're not going to be working in the scriptorium or something like that, because it would just take so many candles and things like that. And that's a fire hazard. So you don't want to like burn down your scriptorium. So a lot of the time you're not going to be doing like any work like that. So it's just like, maybe just go have a nice time and like have a little read. Then at 9 o'clock, you're going to have compline, which is again, one of the minor ones, about half an hour or so. And then you go your ass to bed. And then you're going to go, and then you'll wake up again at midnight. So so this is why you really kind of need your little nappy time after lunch, because like getting that extra hour and a half is going to be crucial if you went to bed at 9:30 and woke up at midnight, right? So and then granted, you go back to bed from like 1 till 5, 5:30, but still, it's disjointed.
Brutal. So did this was this the same for nuns? You know, members of, say, the Poor Clares, or at an all-female abbey? Was it the same practice there?
Yeah. So like the nuns do pretty much exactly the same thing. The Poor Clares are an interesting like counterpoint, though, right? Because the Poor Clares are basically women Franciscans. And what's really interesting about when you have like the female orders of the mendicants, right? Like, because these are all like, you're still probably going to be doing all of these same hours if you're a Franciscan or a Dominican, right? But your work is not like in a scriptorium. Your work is usually like you go out in the city and preach.
Right.
So it's like you're out in the community, and that's the whole deal with the mendicant orders is that you're much more involved in communal life, whereas the enclosed orders, like the Cistercians, for example, they are in their monastery doing their thing because, as far as they're concerned, they're dead to the world, right? Whereas Franciscans and Dominicans, they're like, we administer to people in cities, and we go out and we do these things, right? Which pisses a lot of people off because, like, parish priests are like, no, that's my job.
My turf.
Yeah, and there are turf wars. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
But this doesn't exist for nuns because God, well, you know, if you let women out in public, you know, they're going to be fucking. So the Poor Clares are enclosed. And basically they're just like, we're going to still be inside, but we're going to make sure that life sucks and that like we're not having a nice time. Like we're just a poorer order of nuns, basically. So, and there is this kind of like specific worry. And now also nuns are interesting case studies because, you know, it's super, super common to just like have an order of nuns alongside like a normal ass monastery. So you'll have kind of like a bit with the women in and a bit with the men in, and never the twain shall meet except for like the abbot who goes back and forth. Or you might have independent orders of nuns on their own, but more commonly you have them very close to cities as opposed to kind of like far out in the countryside, because there is some concern, especially in the earlier medieval period, that like, you know, I don't know, Vikings might roll through and it could get ugly. Right. But then there are also cases where this isn't true. So, for example, when we see Hildegard start her nunneries, she's specifically like out in the woods being like, no, girls are doing it for themselves. And we also see this with Eloise when she becomes an abbess. And she starts like the Paraclete with Abelard, and like they go out in the woods as well. So when you get into the high and late medieval period, that changes, and you can see women out in the wilderness more often. But as a kind of general rule of thumb, a lot of the time nunneries are closer to cities unless they are joining with men, especially earlier on.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess that makes sense because they were big jerks to women. It really does suck that they just shoved the poor Claires. They were like, no, get in
not
there.
you though, bitch.
Nope.
Nope.
The guys, sure, whatever, but you get the fuck back in there. So, I mean, you mentioned it a little, but in addition to all of the prayer and supplication and making yourself miserable, they also had like just jobs.
Yeah.
Just like everyday jobs.
You have everyday ass jobs, right? So, you know, I've already mentioned like scriptoriums, and that's like a big deal for monasteries. And usually, like, especially in the earlier medieval period, this is so important because like the reason that books exist and how books circulate is like usually monks scribbling away and just like copying texts, you know, decorating texts, doing things like this. You're also going to have someone who like teaches the novices. So there's going to be a whole ass school there where you look after the little boys. So like there's going to be, or the little girls if you're nuns. So like someone is teaching the whole goddamn time. You've got school as well. So there are teachers. But then there are all like the jobs that need to happen. And now it used to be that, you know, when like the Benedictines and stuff like are founded like back in the day, the idea was that like monks were going to do everything, but then like pretty immediately that stops happening. And so you'll usually have like peasants in who are like bringing in most of the food from farms that the monks own. Like they're not bringing in the fucking harvest. Right.
Yeah.
They might work in the garden.
Yeah.
You know, but like there's a difference between like the garden and the fields, right?
They're not bringing in the sheaves.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you might work in the kitchen garden and keep like, so if you're the herbalist, then you're going to be like out here like tending the physic garden, right? And so making sure that you've got like all the medicinal stuff that you need on hand. There will be usually like one of the, a really kind of heavy duty job is like being the cook or the cellarer. Because you need to have like an eye on what food is in at all times and kind of like be keeping an eye on what's going on in the kitchen. Oftentimes cooking, like being the cook is like a rotating role. So you might have like several people who are the cook and they do it like on one day or another because this is really hard work. You know, like feeding an entire community like that, it's like, so that might switch out, but the cellarer is kind of like in charge of them. You'll also have someone who is in charge of the hospital, and the hospital usually is more like hospitality. Yeah. But it can be like actual hospital roles as well. So like you can take in ill people and you'll be looking after that. And there are usually people kind of like doing nursing services as well. Like this is especially true of orders of nuns. Yeah. Like rather a lot of nursing going on around. So like famously like at the Hotel Dieu in Paris, there's rather a lot of that going on. So you might be like looking in on anyone who's kind of like stopping through, right? You also just have like, well, who looks after the baths, right? Like there's going to be someone who's in charge of like keeping that stuff ticking over. And then if you are a Franciscan or a Benedictine, there is just like preaching.
Yeah.
Right. And like, and being out like in society and finding out what people need and kind of like acting as an intermediary with the community. And then also like possibly just like getting in brawls.
Yeah.
Or out there.
Sometimes you gotta fight it out. So, you've mentioned the mendicants, and they obviously did preaching, and they would, provide some social and charitable services to the people. But what interactions did, the monks and nuns who are in abbeys or, convents, what was their interaction with the locals around them?
It's kind of meant, if you're not a mendicant, that was awkward. It's meant to kind of, if you are not a mendicant, for you to have limited contact with the outside world.
Right.
So there'll usually be someone who is in charge of that. So, for example, again, the cellarer, they're going to be in pretty direct contact with the locals and like whoever's bringing stuff in. But you'll have like people in positions of authority where it's like, I go talk to the peasants who do that.
Yeah.
Or like, I am the stabler. Right. So I look after like all of the animals, but like really what I do is I look after the peasants who look after the animals.
Right.
Right. There will be someone who's doing kind of like selling off whatever it is they make. Like if you are one of the monasteries that does beer making, for example, someone is kind of like talking to the local community. Like if you're the master brewer, you might be talking to people in the local community about selling the beer. But for the most part, you're supposed to be dead to the world.
Right.
You live inside the monastery. You're not supposed to be like chatting to the locals, like, because that way temptation lies. And also it's like you're just supposed to be focused on the task at hand. And they're very serious about that. Like there's a lot of work to do. So there is supposed to be kind of limited positions. And the people who usually have contact with the outside world are usually people who are in more senior positions because basically you've proved that you can deal with all of that without being tempted to shag someone. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Without trading food with the local peasant woman for sex. Yeah. Excuse me. I think that about covers it. I mean, we talked about how how these things work. Are there any big differences? I mean, other than it's all men versus all women. Are there any big differences between what the ladies would go through as opposed to the monks or whatever?
I guess one of the big differences is that the ladies are going to be doing less manual labor.
Okay.
Again, so like they will be gardening and stuff like that for sure, but again, I mean, I keep referring everything back to the name of the rose just because we keep doing it. But like, I mean, the ladies don't have a glazier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Like that's not gonna be how it is. And they might just be like doing more. They might be more focused very specifically on hospital stuff. Right. I suppose one more thing to just kind of like mention is how life is slightly different on Sundays. Because on Sundays you don't do any of the work unless you are a cellarer or cook. Or unless you are in charge of the hospital. So you just do all the praying and reading, and you kind of have Sunday off, unless you have to like look after feeding people, essentially. Yeah. So like Sunday is like the day where it's like just naps and church. Yeah. Right.
CP time, yeah.
Oh, I'm so CP just looking at their schedule.
Yeah, exactly. Like they didn't even have the NFL to watch, or or Premier League or whatever. So yeah, just brutal times. I think that's gonna be good God.
We're both in the same place, homie.
I think that's going to about do it for today's episode. All right. We talked about day in the life of the clergy. Next time we'll come back, we'll bounce around a little bit again. The day in the life. We're going to talk a little bit about had a patron ask about archers. Had another one ask about like people who would do construction. So we're going to talk about a little stuff like that, just bouncing around. Yeah, do at least one more episode in the series, but we'll see after that. Yeah, Eleanor, what's going on with you?
I'd like to remind everyone that I've got a new one-stop shop where you can figure out where my bullshit is, which is eleanorjanaga.com. Shout out Justin for making that for me. We love my boyfriend, folks.
Yep.
He's a good man. He puts up with a lot. Otherwise, I'm on the socials at Going Medieval as per usual. Yeah, I don't know, mate. Like, I've just been pretty swamped doing academic stuff, if you can fucking believe it.
I cannot.
Like, it's really stupid. You don't even get paid for it. Why am I doing this? So I've just been like reading things and thinking and going, and that doesn't really, it does not translate into content at all yet. But yeah, I should, I'm fixing to, at some point this month, I want to write a blog about side hustles. So I'm speaking it out into the universe now.
Do it.
So that it'll happen. So yeah, watch the space. It'll be up at some point in time before the end of the month on going-medieval.com.
Cool. Yeah. You can find me, Luke is Amazing, on most of the socials. I guess I'm on Instagram now. It's Luke is Amazing 0 because some jerk stole my preferred name that I had at one point and forgot the password to a long time ago, and they probably deactivated or something. So it's my fault. But you know what? No, I'm just kidding. Don't bother the other person. That's fine. Yeah, you can find me there. Luke is Amazing on Twitter. Yeah, you can find my old show, People's History of the Old Republic, wherever you listen to podcasts like this one. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.